Estás muy tranquila esta noche, mi amor. ¿El pequeño te está dando problemas otra vez? Aquí déjame ayudarte. Ponte un poco más cómoda, mi amor. No podemos permitir que ustedes dos se estresen ahora, ¿verdad? Ahí vamos. Una posición agradable y cómoda para que ustedes dos descansen. Ya vuelvo, mi amor. Y ustedes solo descansa. Sálvanos del tiempo de prueba y líbranos del mal. Amén. Un mensaje. ¿Cómo es esto posible? Cuando son ambos, aunque el camino sea accidentado e incierto, reclama tu lugar. Como Elden Lord. ¿Es este el deseo que ambos tenían para mí, mi amor? Si ese es el caso, ¿quién soy yo para decir que no? Estaré en casa pronto, mi amor. Con el señorío en la mano, este es mi voto para ti.
Wiggle, wiggle, wiggle. Wiggle, wiggle, wiggle. Wiggle, wiggle, wiggle. Wiggle, wiggle, wiggle.
Later that very same session.
Get ready, everybody. He's about to do something stupid.
¿Debería cuidarlo por si acaso? No, es un hombre grande. Además, no hay nada aquí de qué preocuparse. Estoy de vuelta, mi amor, tal como lo prometí, con señorío en la mano. URGH, maldita sea, esta vieja herida me ha estado matando. Mi mente se siente un poco nublada, y mi cuerpo más pesado por segundo. Descansa, sí. Todos nos sentiremos mejor después de un poco de descanso. Permíteme descansar junto a ustedes dos una vez más, mi amor. Y luego, cuando el caos del mundo lo envuelva todo, no importará, porque finalmente estaremos juntos, como una familia. Exactamente como debería haber sido, desde el principio.
Why, hello there! We hope you enjoyed the story and gameplay segments for Luca. In this section, we will be breaking down the build and the stats for those among you who want to try the build for yourself. So getting into the build stats, we start the game off as a prophet in order to optimize our stats a bit more. And speaking of the stats for this build, we have 60 vigor for the chunky health pool, 22 mind so we can comfortably cast our buffs and spells, 25 endurance so we can wear our gear without the equip load talismans, 15 strength to meet the minimal requirement for our various weapons, 65 dexterity, not only for the casting speed bonus it provides, but also as our main damaging stat for this build, 7 intelligence. 25 faith, which can be boosted to 35 if you want to use the spells which will be covered later on in the video. And finally, we have 60 arcane in order to scale not only our seal of choice, which will affect our poison build-up, but also the build-up of our poison when using our various weapons, making it our secondary main stat for this build. Now, before we get into the weapon selection for this build, we would like to say the following weapon choices are purely for aesthetic, and what we thought fit Luca roleplay-wise, so if you want to use a particular weapon that can be infused with poison, by all means feel free to use it, as these are just our personal choices for this build. And with that disclaimer out of the way, we're going to talk about our first pair of weapons for this build, and that is the Power Stance Scorpion Stingers. These daggers are one of the few in-game weapons that have innate Scarlet Rot build-up, and being a dagger means it can inflict it quite fast, making it an incredible choice for this build, especially when paired with our Talismans of choice, which we will cover more later on into the video. Moving on to one of our personal favorite weapons, which has been added with the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, and that is the fan-favorite Milady, which we have infused with poison using the new Ash of War, the Poison Flower Blooms twice. This Ash of War became a very vital part of this build, not just due to the small amount of Scarlet Rot it inflicts, but purely for the fact that it detonates any inflicted poison or Scarlet Rot on hit. causing heavy damage to the target, making it a good finisher against PvE targets. Next up, we have the main staple of Luca's arsenal, and that is dual poison-infused Anspur rapiers. These potent weapons are the main cornerstone of the build, as not only are they a pair of thrusting swords with innate scarlet rot on them, but they are one of 3 separate scarlet rot weapons that can be infused with poison, making them a no-brainer for this build. Moving on, we have the Serpent Bone Blade. This unique katana, which is acquired through the Volcano Manor questline, was one of the biggest surprises with this build, and actually a weapon we regularly wrote off on many a playthrough. But on this build, it was quite fun to use, and has very good combo potential which synergizes well with this build. But if that wasn't enough, this weapon also sports its own brand of unique poison, which is simply called Deadly Poison. We know, shocker right. Anywho, while this poison effect doesn't last as long compared to the normal variant, it does end up doing considerably more damage, making it a solid choice for low health targets. Now, before we get into our tools, armor, talismans, and spells we have selected for this build, we just want to go over some honorable mentions for this build. Starting off with dual poison-infused Serpent God curved swords, mainly for their ability to heal a small amount of health upon getting a kill. For our next honorable mention, we have the Rotten Staff. This weapon does a surprising amount of damage, and also has the added bonus of having innate scarlet rot on it. However, being a colossal weapon, actually applying it in combat will prove quite challenging. Next up, we have the Pull Blade of the Bud, and this weapon has proved to be rather unique in the most abnormal way, because while its normal moveset is rather solid and capable of some good combos. But what really lets this weapon down is its Ash of War Ramina's purification, and its lack of hyper armor, making even a fart in the wind strong enough to knock you out of it. Next up, we have the Tooth Whip. And while the Ash of War on this whip is primarily PvP focused by affecting stamina regeneration, it does have some PvE focused capabilities, such as inflicting deadly poison and triggering our talismans very comfortably with its Ash of War. Next up, we have probably the most powerful poison weapon you can make in the game, and that is the Poison Venomous Fang. These claws inflict deadly poison, and also have a unique interaction with the poison infusion. And that interaction not only keeps the deadly poison, but now extends its duration to last the same amount of time as non-deadly poison, which means you now get a full minute of deadly poison affecting the target, causing huge damage, making it a good choice for bosses. And for the final weapon in our honorable mentions, we have yet another from the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, and that is the Deadly Poison Perfume Bottle. And while it's not the strongest weapon out there, it lives up to its name and inflicts deadly poison very quickly when using its unique Ash of War deadly poison spray, but that's not all. You see, while this Ash of War can quickly poison enemies, it can also poison you just as fast, and that's a good thing. Don't worry, we haven't gone loony. Well, no more than we were already. Allow us to explain. You see, the reason it's so good is because now you have a remote trigger for items that increase your attack power when poison activates, meaning items like the Poisoned Hand, Mushroom Crown, and Kindred of Rot's Exaltation, which all increase your attack power for a few seconds, can now be easily reactivated for massive damage boosts at will. Now that we covered our weapons, let's get into the various tools in Luca's arsenal, starting off with the aforementioned Poisoned Hand. While this is its own weapon, we typically prefer to keep this equipped in our offhand to benefit from the 7.5% attack boost when we poison something, which with this build is constantly making it a nice passive boost. Now, although Luca is a master swordsman, there are times when he must take a strategic approach, and there's no better way of doing that than sniping down enemies with a bow and arrows. And there are 3 particular choices that really shine with this build. The first being a new addition from the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, and that is the bone bow. And even though the short bow has quite the negative reputation in PvP for being obnoxious, in PvE it is actually a very solid tool for sniping down agile targets at range. Thanks to its unique Ash of War Rancor shot, which turns any arrow fired from this Ash of War into a heat-seeking missile, allowing you to quickly build up poison or scarlet rot from a distance. For our second bow option for this build, we have a base game option in the form of the Serpent Bow. This rather powerful long bow is the only one in the entire game that has innate arcane scaling, which makes it a rather powerful choice for Luca, as this arcane scaling does affect the buildup of certain arrows such as the Serpent Arrows, Bloodbone Arrows, Sleepbone Arrows, and Saint Trina's Arrow, making this bow a rather potent status spreader in PvE content. And for the final bow in Luca's arsenal, we have our personal favorite choice, and that is Ansbach's longbow. Not only is this bow the best looking out of the three, but its Ash of War fan shot shoots 8 arrows simultaneously, not only making it a potent way of dealing damage, but also poisoning or rotting targets at range, which needless to say is amazing when you're in the thick of a fight. And now for the final tool in Luca's arsenal, we have the Dragon Communion Seal. The seal is not only fantastic due to its 0 weight, but also for the fact that the seal has a primarily arcane scaling, making it perfect for Luca. Due to the fact that any poison spells we cast using the seal now benefit from the arcane scaling. But most importantly, all our offensive spells will now do increased damage due to our high arcane stat. Now, while we're on the topic of spells, let's go over our mainstay spells, as well as a few flavor spells that you can use to really make this build unique. Starting off with our buff spells, we have the tried and true Golden Vow, not only for its 15% damage increase, but also a very handy 10% increase to our defenses, which is huge given the fact we are using primarily medium weight armor on this build. Next up, we have Blessing's Boon. This regeneration spell offers a little passive healing while you're traversing the landscape, and when paired with the Serpent God curved swords mentioned earlier in the video, you'll be able to stay at relatively high levels of health quite consistently during your adventures, making Blessing's Boon a comfortable choice to keep on your spell bar. Now, we'll dive into the offensive spells for the build, which, depending on your personal preference, will dictate whether you choose to run one or both of these spells, as they are pretty much the same thing, just with varying FP requirements per cast, depending on the version you choose to use. And these spells are the Pest Threads, and its upgraded version added with the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, the Pest Thread Spears. Both of these spells are incredibly useful when used against large targets, which, let's face it, is a vast majority of enemies and bosses in game, purely due to the fact that it shares a similar mechanic to one of our favorite intelligence spells, Shard Spiral. And that is much like Shard Spiral, it will continuously hit enemies as it passes through them, stacking up incredible amounts of damage with each cast, and at a 19 and 28 FP cost can be chain casted to stack up thousands of damage, depending on how big the target you are fighting is. Now, before we get into the talismans and fashion for this build, we just want to go over some flavor spells you can use to enhance the build, and further lean into Luca's theme of being the Rose Knight. However, before we do, we just want to say the following spells are very situational and are easily interruptible, making them hard to use without the use of the Endure Ash of War. Now, with that being said, let's get into our first flavor spell of the build, which is the Rotten Breath. Although this spell has nothing to do with Luca's overall theme, it does offer him a way to reliably proc Scarlet Rot without using his limited arrows or going in head first with his weapons, making it a solid choice for him. For our next flavor spell, we have the iconic move of Melania herself, and that is the Scarlet Ionia. The spell releases Scarlet Rot in a large area after quite a lengthy animation. But if you can land it head-on, it will end up inflicting Scarlet Rot on the target guaranteed. Well, providing they don't have crazy resistances to it, that is. And last, but certainly not least, we have yet another spell added with the Shadows of the Erdtree DLC, and that is the Scarlet Butterflies, and much like the Scarlet Ionia spell, it also inflicts Scarlet Rot in a large area, and again after quite the lengthy animation. Which, not that we think about it, this spell isn't much different than Scarlet Ionia, is it? But hey, butterflies, right? You know what, let's just move on with the build, shall we? Now let's get into Luca's talismans. For his first talisman, he is using the Erdtree's Favor +2 for the boost to his health, stamina, and equip load, allowing him to medium roll, without resorting to using the Great Jar's arsenal in order to do so. For our next talisman, we're using the newly added Two-Headed Turtle Talisman to help with our stamina economy and to make sure we always have enough gas in the tank to dodge or get stuck in when the need arises. Moving on to our third talisman, we're using Millicent's Prothesis. Yes, we know what you have to do to get it, but unfortunately, it fits too well on this build to not use it, as not only does it give us a +5 to Dexterity, now taking us to 70, but will also increase our attack power by 4, 6, and 11% as long as we are chaining together attacks. And finally, for our last talisman, we have the Kindred of Rot's Exaltation. As stated earlier in the tools section, this ring offers us a 20% attack boost when poison triggers around the character, and when combined with the poisoned hand. The fully stacked Millicent's Prothesis and our fully stacked Crystal Tear, we will end up with a 58.5% attack boost, which can be increased to 78.5% damage boost if you choose to use the Mushroom Crown, meaning Luca has plenty of damage ready in order to claim his title. Now, before we get into the fashion for this build, we're just going to quickly go over our Flask of Wondrous Physick and the Crystal Tears that we decided to use in it. Starting off with the Thorny Crack Tear, this Crystal Tear behaves much like Millicent's Prothesis Talisman, causing our attack power to increase by 9, 13, and 20% as long as we are chaining together attacks while it is active. And for our second tear, we have the Opaline Heart Tear. This Crystal Tear grants us a 15% defense across the board for a respectable 3 minutes, helping us survive challenging encounters just that little bit more. And finally, in order to wrap up the build, it's time to get into what is probably our favorite thing about making any build on this channel, and that is the fashion. So getting into the fashion, we are using the unaltered Ronin armor chest piece for its amazing cape and overall weathered appearance, granting Luca the appearance of a duelist who has seen many a fight in his day. For his boots, we are using Blades Greaves, not only for the plating on the thighs, but also some rather stylish leather boots to strut around in. And for the gauntlets, we are using the Godric Soldier Gauntlets, not only for the rather perfect color match, but also the wrapping around the right hand gauntlet, which reflects Luca and his story rather well. And finally, to top it all off, we are using the newly added Dane's hat to put the crowning glory on Luca's fashion. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, that covers everything with Luca. We hope you enjoyed the build, the story, as well as the gameplay segments. And if you like poisoning your enemies and getting supercharged damage as a result, we hope you'll consider giving Luca a chance. And we can't thank you enough for watching until the end. And until the next video, please, take care, stay safe, and we'll see you next time.